Good afternoon and welcome back. I need to say thank you once again. Most of you joined in before the bell even rang. I think you are very, very keen for this session to start up. And of course, for those who are watching us at home, you might have missed, we had a little bit of a sound check. So a little bit of a sneak peek of what to expect a little bit later on in the day. Now, something very big happened yesterday. Can anyone tell me? No one could tell me yesterday, but see if you can now. The rankings launch, yes. QS, the 20th edition of the QS World University Rankings was launched. You would have seen a few signs around showcasing some of the institutions. We looked at a video about the history as well. Now this panel is talking a little bit more about what went into that, its implications, the history, etc. To kick us off, we have Ben Sowter, the Senior Vice President at QS Quacquarelli Symonds. Please welcome him to the stage.
I'm going to hopefully be switched on. Yep. I'm not going to take to the stage. I'll invite my panelists to join the stage. I'll introduce them in a few minutes. And obviously, for those of you who were at the RCSI event last night, you will have heard from Nunzio a relatively detailed history of what's happened with the QS rankings over the years, how it came about, those original conversations and original motivations, and even a little bit on some of the new methods and new dimensions that we're introducing in this 20th anniversary edition. I wanted to take a slightly different tack. 20 years, where did that go, right? I mean, maybe a few of you feel like that. Pretty much I still feel the same as I did 20 years ago until I meet somebody or stumble across something and it really puts life in perspective. In February, I was in India, in our Mumbai office, and one of my colleagues was celebrating their 22nd birthday that day. And I'm like, okay, so you're an adult and your birthday began with a 2. I'm processing that, trying to figure that through. It's been a privilege for 20 years to work with universities. Universities are incredible. You might not feel that if you work inside a university sometimes, because I know life can be frustrating. We live in increasingly, it seems, increasingly uncertain times. And we look to our political leaders, and sometimes in some countries we find scant character, scant resolve, evidence of the temporary all the time, concerns about the next election cycle over the greater good. For the most part, the leadership of universities outlasts the leadership of governments, particularly in the UK lately, where it's been something of a revolving door. So universities have this great collective power that if they can agree on things, if they can find consensus, if they can gather that stimulus to act, they've got incredible potential. However, I had somebody talk to me about this analogy that I was already planning to use, but it's quite common for universities to be characterized as oil tankers, essentially. You know, big, cumbersome entities that are difficult to change the direction of, that you turn the wheel and maybe in a few miles the prow of the ship will gradually begin to turn. But because it takes so long to turn, well, if we get it wrong, that's going to be a problem, so maybe we should just keep going in a straight line. Indeed, for many years, particularly around the area of online education, we've been talking about this for 15, probably 20 years, actually, since the rankings began. The importance, the emergence of online education, and universities have been like, let's just keep on doing things the same way. You know, that maverick academic in the economics department, he can play with some toys, but we're going to carry on. Yet, when the pandemic struck and everybody agreed that change had to happen, universities went from what they were before to wholly online in what? A week? Did any university that's represented in this room do it in less than a week? Yeah, what was the number? How many days did it take you? I mean, that's outrageous. Universities are not oil tankers. You know, when universities can find that consensus, that unity, they can move in that direction. They're not oil tankers, they're superheroes. Allow me to expand. The vast majority of universities have an inspiring origin story. They are a powerful force for good. They frequently misunderstand the world around them in a variety of different ways. They are often misunderstood by the world around them. They save lives. They perform miracles. They have their flaws, sometimes surprising weaknesses and flaws. And, critically, a key dimension of some of the new metrics that we're bringing in this year, they work much better in teams. So, if we're going to compare universities for a moment to superheroes, then the hero's journey applies. Act 1, the departure. We recognize we've got some nascent potential, some capability to do things. We step forward into the unknown. We get tested. We look into the abyss, as many universities have done in the past few years. And we return transformed, able to move on to the next challenge and able to tackle the inevitable antagonist at the end of the story. So it's a challenge, as we've identified, to rationalize and get an organization like a university to all get lined up and focus on the same things and move in a consistent direction. But if we want to create the Justice League of universities, we need to go bigger than that. We need to develop consensus on what's important to the whole sector. We need to figure out how universities can work together to solve some of the greatest challenges facing our species. We know they can do it because they all just did it. They all showed us that they can do it. If we can agree what those challenges are, then universities have got an incredible power to transform our society and the world on which we live for future generations. So how do we go about doing that? Well, one of the things that's happened in the past 20 years is we've noticed that by compiling somewhat blunt metrics, somewhat reductionist metrics, things that overlook very much of the nuance that exists in all of your institutions, but nonetheless begin to telegraph some collective priorities, significant numbers of institutions use that as a yardstick and begin to think about how they can evolve in those directions. We've seen universities internationalize aggressively. Rankings have been one of the stimuli that have been cited for reasons for that. We've seen institutions collaborate on research more effectively. And it wasn't only because of the rankings. I'm not placing too much credit on what we're doing, but in certain parts of the world, the rankings helped catalyze a quality ecosystem. So what we've seen is that some of the measures that we include, as a result of all of the people that look at them, can influence institutions, usually to do things that they already want to do a little bit more quickly and assertively, and to develop consensus around those things. So 20 years in, we felt we had no choice but to take that responsibility seriously, to introduce some new measures, to engage with the sector globally, both students, academics, employers, institutions themselves, challenge them to help us understand what's important that's currently overlooked. And as a result, as hopefully most of you already know, we've introduced 3 new measures this year. One of sustainability, one of international research network to look at that power of collaboration, and one of employment outcomes, which is an aspect that students have persistently told us is vital to their decision-making process. We've elevated our employer reputation measure a little bit, and we've taken weight away from our 40% academic reputation measure, now 30%, and we've reduced faculty-student ratio from 20 to 10%. As a result, many of you are enjoying, or perhaps enduring, quite different results than you've seen before. This is a reset. We can't reliably at a top-line level compare year-on-year performance, but we're challenging institutions to take important missions that they've all been telling us they share a little bit more seriously, look at those measures, and accelerate some of that important work. So without further ado, I'll introduce the esteemed panel that we have assembled for you. First of all, we have Professor Helen McCarthy, Chair of Nanomedicine at Queen's University of Belfast, Associate PVC of Academic Business Development, and CEO of pHion Therapeutics, a medtech startup. Not busy much, but we had a great conversation earlier, some fantastic perspectives on this topic. We have Selma Tui, who I'm very proud to be able to call a colleague. She's now Director Europe for QS, but she has a wide-ranging career inside universities, at Coventry University, at Nottingham Trent University, and is a graduate of Trinity College Dublin. And Martyn Edwards, Director of Marketing and Advancement for Loughborough, who is busy trying to collect every Welsh university on his CV, having worked at Swansea, South Wales, Loughborough, Nottingham, Loughborough, Bangor, Cardiff Met, and Cardiff universities. He's also had spells with IDP and the British Council, so he's got a wide-ranging perspective on how rankings have been influencing student choice over the past 20 years. Our panel. So, was that a round of applause? We can do the round of applause. Let's do the round of applause. So first of all, and I'm going to ask our panel to be really concise with this, just to set the scene. What is it that has encouraged you to accept a position on a panel on such a sometimes contentious subject of rankings? What's your general position on their usefulness and or shortcomings? And I'll start with Helen.
And you want me to be concise and truthful?
Yes, absolutely.
I think that the rankings do definitely have a place. Why did I accept being on this panel today? Was because I felt that possibly the story that we have at Queen's on how we have changed our approach to rankings and how we've changed how we tackle them might be of interest, or maybe not, to the room. And also, in my new role as Associate Pro-Vice-Chancellor, which started last August, obviously it's in the realms of academic business development. I learned very quickly that if you're not ranked in an ideal place, it's going to be quite difficult to do the types of academic business development that you might want to do. So we sort of made it our mission to try to really get under the skin of the rankings and figure out what was going on at our institution.
Thank you, Helen.
And my boss twisted my arm.
Okay. Selma.
I accepted to be on this panel because I've been enduring rankings in the various positions that I held at universities, which traditionally weren't very highly ranked in the overall rankings, but of course remained extremely important to the student decision-making factor, and maybe more importantly, to sponsors, funders, and the bank of mum and dad, right? So I've had to have lots of creative ways of talking about rankings. And now, of course, I'm on the other side of the table, where as director here at Europe for QS, I've got 9 people in my team, and all day long, and I mean all day long, from 6 a.m. to midnight, we answer your good queries on rankings, positions, data, insights, and some of those unpublished data points about your particular position in the rankings, as well as those of your neighbors. Because often to understand your own ranking is less meaningful than understanding actually what the guy next door is doing. And that's a really good way to kind of benchmark your progress and how your institution is faring publicly.
Martyn.
Hi, everyone. I think it's probably 3 things for me, and it's always a challenge to be concise, but I think the first one really is my institutional, my day job, institutional priority, which is, for those of you that don't know, I work at Loughborough University, #1 in the world for sport. But for a lot of people globally, probably never heard of Loughborough, or very unfamiliar with Loughborough. I often say Loughborough's probably the best university you've never heard of. So there's obviously there's a challenge there for me as a sort of head of marketing and brand, etc. But we've got a new Vice-Chancellor, fairly new Vice-Chancellor, and he set out his stall very early. So, like Helen, my boss's boss twisted my arm, I guess. And he set out that we would be in the top 200 in the world in the QS by 2030, which is, I think, what a lot of people who are not in the top 200 in the world want to be. So there's definitely a journey that we're on, because traditionally we've been quite a domestically focused university. We've got a very strong track record in the UK league tables, which is all around student experience and learning and teaching, so it's slightly different, some overlap with the global methodology. But now we've pivoted, so we want to preserve that, but we also want to grow our global reputation, and clearly, you know, the QS is a key part of that. But on a more personal level, I spent probably the best part of 10, 12 years as a recruiter, as a road warrior, going all over the world, some fantastic places, and you know, continually having that conversation with students and parents and school counsellors and agents about quality and about rankings, how to interpret rankings. So again, there's that bit that appeals to me as well, and understanding it more. Yeah.
Okay, before I ask my next question, because it's very easy to get carried away with a panel like this, I could just talk to you guys and forget that there's a whole group of other people in the room. If you do have a question for the panel, you know, please do raise a hand. We'll introduce them as soon as we can. I've guessed some of the questions you might be interested in, but if you can help me by giving me the specifics of what your curiosities are, we can get to them more quickly. But whilst you're thinking about that, just to throw the next question back to the panel. Martyn and Selma, you've worked a lot in that student attraction space. So from you, I'm interested in understanding, you know, what interesting ways, beyond the obvious, have you seen rankings influencing student decision-making? And Helen, perhaps, on the sort of research collaboration piece and building partnerships in the research space, perhaps how have you come across rankings influencing that dialogue?
Starting with me?
I'll start with you, Helen.
Yeah, okay. I think that you can get very fixated on rankings for research collaborations. It depends what the purpose of the research collaboration is. So we have some research collaborations where the goal is to really upskill in some certain areas, and obviously in that case, actual rankings become pretty much irrelevant. We also have got ambitions, and we do have a number of what we would call core partnerships with universities that would be higher ranked, and that's to give our own academic colleagues that opportunity. But very often, and to be perfectly honest, the way that research collaborations work are at a one-to-one level to begin with. It's really with the connection with the academic to academic. It's somebody that you know of or you've met at a conference is doing really interesting work. For example, I was over in Boston at BioUS and I met a young lecturer who just started in Harvard, and he was very interested in how he collaborated with the institutions in Ireland because he had family that were from Ireland, and you're from Harvard, yeah, let's talk, you know? So it's kind of a bit like that at the academic level, and then whenever it becomes something bigger, you think, okay, well, how can we do student exchanges? How can our research lab go to your research lab? How can you build upon that? I myself personally had 3 different sabbaticals, if you like, over in the States, and they were not in highly ranked institutions as I started off, but that informed my whole academic journey. So I think it starts research-wise more academic to academic, for sure.
Yeah, I had a great conversation with the Provost for Research at MIT last year. And he said that they get all these visits, number 1 in the world, so they get all these visits from universities all over the place trying to establish partnerships. And the first question the MIT team asked these visiting delegations is, so what are we already doing? And most of them go, I didn't even think to look. And they're like, okay, nice to meet you. Move along. So that one-to-one at an academic level, what's already happening before the partnership really forms and takes
But I think it's
flight.
really important then for institutions to get a handle on everything that's going on, and that is the tricky thing to do, to basically map out. I'm not talking about all the official MOUs, MOAs that are in place. I'm talking about that individual relationship piece. That can be very difficult to sort of, you know, make sure you have that in front of you, and to use that then as a lever to greater things. And I think that's definitely a challenge for universities.
Yeah. So Selma, you spent quite a lot of time engaging in building student flows from Africa, in particular, which is an emerging market that many internationally oriented universities are increasingly looking at. How did you run into rankings and related metrics in that sort of a context?
That's a good question, yeah. I spent just under a decade in Nigeria in particular, running kind of student recruitment operations for a range of UK universities, but then I went to the dark side, and I did it for a large group of US universities as well, which is an even madder marketplace because there's more than 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States. And standing in Kano, Nigeria, how do you make that decision of where to go? And I just can't overstate what a big decision it is to go and study. And if you get the green light to go, and you've got the support of your family, or you've got a sponsor, or you've been able to save up that money because there's no student loans or bank loans or credits, this is cash that someone has received or saved up to go abroad, how do you choose where's the right place for you? And if anyone attended a talk I did yesterday in one of the workshops, a lot of universities have merged to look exactly the same. So if we look at the UK marketplace, the UK context, I live in Nottingham in the East Midlands, and I'm surrounded by lots of universities. I won't say their names, but there's lots of universities around Nottingham or in Nottingham, which generally, standing in Kano, all look very same. There's already a presumption of a quality indicator. If I'm going to the UK, I know that I'll receive a quality education. So it starts to become about other things, about lifestyle. Is it welcoming? How much does it cost? Are there other people like me there? And those become the points of differentiation, but they have to look very hard for those points. They have to research very hard because we've made all of our prospectuses and all of our materials look exactly the same. And so one of the ways as a recruiter advocating for a particular institution is to drill down to the subject level, right? Come to Loughborough because we are #1 in the world. There is nowhere better that you can go on this planet than Loughborough for sport, or at NTU. There's nowhere better that you can go for art and design than, you start to form this narrative, which you drill down to those specifics. And often, if you don't have that narrative of that specific subject or that specific tagline, it's about extracting some of those other things. Did you know that you'll be able to enjoy a much better teaching experience because we have a lower faculty to student ratio at this institution versus our big neighbor who are very research intensive? You start to formulate some of these things that may be attractive to that particular student, but it has to be right for them as well. So it's never a trick, it's never a con. You want people that will genuinely fit with your institution and to be able to use some of those levers to educate or to expose them to some of the benefits of coming there.
So Martyn, I feel like Selma scooped your big news hook in her contribution there, but your reflections on how these metrics have affected student choice in your experience?
I think it's really interesting. I was in a session earlier today and we were talking about what you said earlier, Ben, about that colleague that was 22 and thinking about Generation Alpha. We've been talking about Gen Z for a long time, and now Generation Alpha, I think most of you probably know, but it's people born from like 2010 onwards. And the number of people in that demographic is going to be about 2 billion by 2025, which is just incredible. And we were starting to talk about, what does that mean for how we market to students, how we recruit students, how we teach students? Because that 2 billion across the world is such a diverse group. You can't even treat them as one homogenous group. There's not even you can't do student personas for 2 billion potential people. And I guess one of the big things that we talk about with Generation Alpha is that sense of purpose that they're looking for. They are holding brands to account more, they're holding organizations to account more, they're more values driven, they're more altruistic, generally speaking, without drawing too many conclusions. And I think what I like about particularly some of the elements of the new QS methodology around the SDG alignment and sustainability is it's really focusing, these conversations are happening already. Loughborough's a big campus university, we do a lot of research into renewable energy, etc. But we're having to, I think, walk the walk even more, as well as talking the talk. And what the QS helps us do is, really get a bit of momentum, a bit of data, a bit of keeping up with the Joneses as well, benchmarking against others. And that really helps, I think, to sort of focus attention. Because I do think, as I say, this new generation is going to be more demanding, looking at our values, looking at our faculty. They look like me? Are they racially diverse? Are there protected characteristics, but also that sort of wider purpose and mission. And I think that's something that increasingly we're going to be held to account with students, and they're looking at this methodology now through that lens as well.
So before I carry on. Any questions from the floor? I've given you a few minutes to think about it. It works better if you stick a hand up and ask, but I'm happy to. There we go. Fantastic. Can we get a?
A question for Helen around the academic relationships that you mentioned. How have Queen's harnessed that to impact on their reputation scores?
Okay.
Practically.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for asking that question. I should just say that the way that Queen's are now going about it is that our reputation and rankings, we're putting academics at the heart of that. And I don't believe that we will drive any change unless we empower academics at the grassroots level. And that's how we've gone about it. In every institution, and this is a part that I really struggle with. I really struggle with the idea of, putting other institutions down or saying that I'm better than another, we're better than another institution. That doesn't sit well with academics in general, because you asked us a question about research collaboration, and academics collaborate by nature. And so to actually say, oh, well, we're better than you because of X, Y, and Z, I think academics struggle with the buy-in with that narrative in general. So as I was about to say before I sidetracked there, essentially in institutions, I don't care what institution it is in the world, there is exceptional research, exceptional teaching, and a goal in every institution to educate our future generations. That is what this is about. And for me, I think that it's really kind of, in every institution, what hasn't been great is the communication and the join-up. There has been siloed areas across the board. So, for example, in Queen's, we've decided to go, no, this is going to be academic-led. We're going to have reputation champions in each school, and we're going to make them understand that they can be part of delivering the change. And there's challenge, there's pushback, but that's good. What academic doesn't get challenge and pushback? And that's a great thing to talk about. And essentially what we have got is a situation whereby then we have reputation leads in all the directorates coming together with us on a very regular basis. And you can have the strategy of getting into the top 200 in the world, etc. But you don't have, the strategy doesn't come to fruition unless you know how to implement it. And implementation is key. So we hold people accountable now. We put together a whole range of activities. And what has happened is a new way of working. The metrics from the QS have actually changed how we work in Queen's for a common goal. So frequently, you might go to a various directorate and they would go, this is my bit, nothing to see here. There's nothing to see, it's fine, it's all under control. But that's not the way academics work. Academics like to collaborate, they like to share, and it's trying to build that ethos throughout the whole institution. And we've got to a point now where we call it the R175 because it is our ambition to get to 175 by 2030. Not because we want to be at that number, because that actually helps us have financial sustainability, and that's what it comes down to. And I'm sure Ben will ask me about the uniqueness of Belfast and all the rest of it, and we'll get into that. But for me, it's about improving the communication within a university, making everybody understand that this is the train, this is the direction of travel. This is how you can play your part in it. So if an academic publishes a great paper, this is how you can tweet about it, or you can share it with the world. Or for example, I was walking through one of the cafe areas in Queen's, and we'd had a meeting at a new way of working. And I saw somebody from our alumni department, with our civic engagement department, with our employability department, talking about how they all individually link with employers, but there was no join-up. And join-up is key. Yeah. And you know, I walked up to them and I gave each of them a high five, and I was like, this is absolutely brilliant. This is what we want to see. This is how we want to drive the change. So I don't know if that answers your question, but essentially for me, everybody in the higher education sector is delivering quality, but not everybody is communicating it and working together.
Martyn, you want to add something?
Yeah, it's very similar actually. So obviously we've, say, new vice-chancellors come in, said 200 in the world, but totally agree. You know, we now have a structure in place. It can't be the marketing department owning that, right? You know, so the person that owns it is our Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research. He owns that KPI. But then beneath him, we have very similar, we have academic reputational champions, same terminology, across different schools. We've built support around them. We've got APVCs now as well that look at certain strategic themes. And I guess the key thing is when the Vice-Chancellor decided the sort of rationale for being top 200, obviously there's lots of benefits to it, but for him it was more what it symbolised, which is if we can get into that mindset of being a top 200 university, it's what it's a proxy for, and it's a proxy for things like, you know, increasing our international faculty. We want to be more international, not just increasing student numbers, but actually being more globally minded as a university. We are quite domestically focused, so encouraging more academics to collaborate internationally and drive those sorts of behaviours, and also improve our international student careers and employability support as well, which is often something that British universities have been quite, well, UK universities have been quite slow to do. So it's that culture piece, I think, that culture change, but it's got to be collective, shared ownership. It can't just be a professional service just telling people what to do. That'll never work. It'll never work.
Any follow-up questions from the floor? This one here.
Hi, thank you. I suppose my question is to Selma, really, and Martyn, to talk about creating the narrative, because I think that's more and more important as we move forward with students having access to greater resources, students doing more research into the universities they want to go to. And I think that one of the things that British universities particularly have become, as you said, Selma, very homogenised in what they are doing. And it isn't always that easy to tell us apart. So how would you recommend institutions use things like the QS rankings, the metrics that come out of those, to build that narrative that actually helps students find the right institution for them?
Do you want to go first?
I'll start by saying that unlike Martyn, I'm not a marketeer, right? So, I mean, Martyn is very much an expert in this space, but there has never been as much information, and people, I mean, ourselves, I'm sure you feel it every day, we're bombarded by choice and by information. I'm originally from a very small country called Iceland, total population 320,000 people, right? And it blows my mind that over 58 million people access our student-facing website at QS every year. 58 million students log on to topuniversities.com, where we list the rankings and information about institutions like Bangor and Loughborough and Queen's. 58 million, and that's because they're eager for that information and they're trying to make a choice. And then they have the parents' influence, they have agents on the ground, they have peer pressure, they have the media. So it's absolutely an information bombardment. And at the same time, as we said, and Sam, you and I have worked at some similar institutions where universities are at the same time becoming more and more the same, right? And so often any choice is a good choice, because already there's a quality indicator knowing coming to the UK where all institutions have to be accredited. You can't be a Mickey Mouse university like in the US where anyone can open, right? There's already a presumed quality indicator by coming to a place like the UK and many others. But rankings help you really establish, if you understand the methodology, it helps you tell a story or to understand from the student perspective, okay, this institution has a high research output in this particular area, or this institution has a high employer reputation or employer outcomes for this particular area. And then you can start to make a more nuanced choice and be more specific about the information that you want. But as Ben said, it's a really blunt instrument. And the danger is when you only understand the overall ranking of an institution, and we often emphasize the overall rank, where actually, yes, you are joining an institution, but you may be joining the Department of Chemistry or the Department of Sport or Art and Design. And it's also very important to understand the outputs of that faculty, the ethos of that faculty, and because those will be your peers, your mentors, your tutors, and that's where you'll really be the graduate from. So I think it's up to all of us as educators and in this space, and particularly to the road warriors. More and more of us have in-country offices based in China, in India, in Nigeria, in Kenya. More and more of you are opening offices in places like the US. And it's your obligation to train your in-country agents and officers in particular on what this actually means. Because if they're being queried about how did Bangor become this ranked institution, why is Loughborough #1, they have to be able to answer the question honestly, openly, and point to the right resources. And that's a bit that all of us, I think, can do a little bit better in.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic answer. I mean, I could talk about marketing theory all day, but I'll probably bore you all to death. But I think it's one of the things that we've started to do now as part of this new strategy is really focus, I think, on what I think a lot of university marketing and PR teams are forced to tell all the stories all the time to everybody. And there's more and more information and less meaning. And I think that, you know, what we've got is, you know, a new Vice-Chancellor, new senior management as well, that are comfortable in empowering us to really go after those stories that are the right ones, where we can actually say we're legitimately good at this. And that's a different change of approach, because it does mean saying to some academic colleagues, do you know what, that particular achievement, that's fantastic, but it's not newsworthy. It's not going to be, it's such a niche area, we're not going to throw money behind it. We're not going to do a campaign around it or a video. In the past, we didn't really have that sort of support from a senior leadership level, so we've got a whole long-term project around our reputation, which I can talk to you about offline, I guess, and pick up. But I think we've come to that realization that there's just so much noise. We've really got to try and focus on places where we can legitimately say we are distinctive, and using the QS to evidence that, but also, you know, other proof points as well, links to the industry, international partnerships, you know, employability, whatever. But I think you're right. It's a real challenge, but all the more reason, I think, to engage, you know, with these sorts of rankings, because I think it is particularly now as I keep coming back to this, the change in methodology is really interesting, and I think for us looking at our I won't say just a rebrand, it's beyond just a rebrand, looking at how we shape the position of the university and the narrative and our mission and our purpose to 2030. We're all trying to do this right, but I think it's really all the more reason then to really zone in on what are the key areas where we are good, where we're having an impact, where we're linking it back to the SDGs, global challenges, and also the UK government's agenda as well in certain key areas, levelling up and that kind of thing.
So, I mean, I'll take your question in a moment. I just want to spin that question slightly for Helen. You know, what we're getting to here is the sense that, you know, reputation isn't just about pure prestige. You know, nobody can out-Harvard Harvard. It's about a combination, perhaps, of prestige and distinctiveness, memorability, recall. And a big factor in that is place and context that the university finds itself in. You alluded to, you know, the distinctiveness of Belfast earlier, but how does the university overcome and capitalize on the opportunities and challenges that presents?
Well, for those of you that know Belfast quite well, and those of you that know Ireland quite well, you will know that Belfast is a very unique place. And I understand, Selma, that maybe many of the UK universities are becoming, you know, very alike, and to differentiate is very difficult. At Queen's, we have a number of, let's say, caveats that people may not know about. You know, we have a limitation on the fee setting structure as part of the Good Friday Agreement, and so we are sort of limited on the amount that we can charge our students, rightly so, because we have, you know, 30% of our students would be from what we would class, you know, almost widening participation needs. So that creates a very different narrative for us at Queen's. At Queen's, we take social responsibility really importantly. We actually give $3 billion back into an economy that only has 1.8 million people each year into Northern Ireland. So our social and civic responsibility becomes really important to us. We have only come to the internationalisation phase probably a bit late in the day, not because Queen's doesn't want to collaborate internationally, but you can imagine that we didn't exactly have the best growing bed there to do that. And now, anybody that's been to Belfast in the last few years versus maybe 10 years ago will see a massive difference in the openness and the collaborative nature. And so it's welcoming for international students. Also happens to be one of the safest and the lowest priced places to live right now, which again is a great selling point. But the commitment that the staff and students that we have to our students as well, Queen's is a net, well, not Queen's, Northern Ireland is a net exporter of talent to Great Britain. because there's a Mazen cap from Stormont to basically say that you can't take on any more than this particular number of students. So because of that, we have expanded our international cohorts, and we now have around 4,000 out of our 24,000 population in place. And again, we want to give them that slice of Belfast, that slice of feeling part of the family and the community. And I think that in particularly for one of your metrics, and I'm generally an advocate of the metrics, but for one of them in particular, which is the outcomes one, the employability outcomes, where you measure the quality of your alumni on these lists that we don't know what they are. For regional universities that are global but have civic and social responsibility, that's a challenge. Because if you haven't got anybody on your list, it's a multiplication of 0. And a multiplication of 0 is never good news in the metrics. So I think, I do genuinely like what you've done in terms of the metrics. I think sustainability one is great and how it's caveated out. I do think that there are nuances there that perhaps aren't quite being captured.
I have absolutely no doubt that that's true. This is a lifelong project for some of us. Some of the team that have worked together on the project are here at the conference, potentially here in the audience. Take the opportunity to talk to them because we are a sponge for ideas of how to further improve and refine our approaches. So it was a great conversation earlier that we had in a bit more detail about that. But there was a question.
Yes, hello, Caleb House from the Czech Technical University in Prague, and continuing a couple of the thoughts that have already come up, perhaps on the topic of nuances that aren't quite being captured, and also thanking Selma for bringing up the topic of universities becoming more and more similar. And I think on the 20th anniversary of QS rankings, maybe we can wonder if that's a coincidence, or if having one system or a couple of systems for deciding what makes a university excellent is putting a great deal of pressure on universities to become more and more similar, which I think first we see in the Anglo-Saxon system where the methodology fits. But as an American who has seen the impact of rankings for 30, 40 years, and in fact chose my bachelor's degree very naively based on the US News and World Report rankings, and now working in Central Europe where the vision of what a university is and what it values is quite different, I am quite concerned about the impact of the global rankings. Now, of course, this is a tool that has to exist, and it's a very useful tool. The ranking organizations themselves, I believe, would admit that it is still a work in progress. But the new methodology brings up a lot of concerns for me that the focus is going in the wrong direction, that the value of the rankings is comparing apples to apples, and in subject rankings, graduate employability, sustainability, what we were talking about here, of allowing students to choose what is important to them. However, in the global rankings, we know that that is going to suck all of the oxygen out of the room. And the reason it is so powerful and why it has become perhaps accidentally more of a utility than a tool is because people love simplicity, and students especially will always look at the global rankings first. So my question, for those outside of the rankings, how much conversation is there within your institutions that if the goal is to be in the top 200, is there concern about does the ranking methodology actually fit what the university wants to be, or does it just want to be in the top 200? For those within the rankings, my question is there any conversation or consideration of de-emphasizing or perhaps one day discontinuing global rankings and focusing on a more fit-for-purpose suite of rankings that fit the right audience and the right vision for different types of universities and allowing space for that? Thank you very much.
I'll have a go. No, I think it's without sharing too much. You know, we have monthly university executive board meetings now, where we sort of quite expensive meetings, half day, led by the Vice-Chancellor, so all the directors of professional service like me, all our deans, Pro-Vice-Chancellors. And the last one, we had a live discussion on this because we're co-creating the university's new research strategy, research innovation strategy. And as I say, Loughborough traditionally, for those who don't know, domestically, so the Times, the Guardian, the various university guides, you know, we've been top 10 now for more than 10 years. And a lot of that methodology is around largely undergrad student experience and a very domestic undergrad student experience. So for us to then shift, as I pivot from that, not quite overnight, to become more research intensive. And we do a lot of research already, but even more research intensive and more internationally engaged. That's a big strategic shift. I won't say it makes us a bit schizophrenic. I don't use that word flippantly, but it could be seen as being at odds with each other. And that's a live discussion. And we haven't necessarily reconciled that, being really honest with you. And I think part of the challenge as well is, and a lot of you will know this, and probably yourself, you know, if you've got a very talented academic that is very good at presenting, they often get pulled in to do international travel, open days, supervise lots of PhD students. They'll still want to teach, so they're committed to their discipline. They'll do a lot of research, and they're just stretched and stretched and stretched. So I'm not an academic, you know, I've been at university obviously, but I've never worked in academia, but I'm having much more involvement now in conversations around academic workload than I've ever had in my life before. And also the capacity for staff to take on more PhD students, we've got more international PhDs. So I don't have an answer for you, but I think you're right, there is a tension. I think some bigger universities, we're not the biggest, with probably more staff and more flexibility, our capacity can probably have a better chance, but it is a challenge for us, you know, it is a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at Queen's, I think to answer your question, we've found the rankings incredibly useful. I don't believe that we'd be opting out of them at any point, although the Vice-Chancellor may correct me when I go home, but for now, we're pretty happy. But the rankings doesn't dictate our strategy. The rankings is a proxy for quality.
Yeah.
It's a proxy for, particularly for research-driven education, which is something that we very strongly believe in. And so for us, you know, you'll be surprised, well, or unsurprised to learn, given our financial constraints as well, we're very entrepreneurial in our mindset. And so we have over 100 spin-outs that have come out of Queen's alone. And, you know, on the basis of all of that, we have been able to look at the body of evidence and actually understand that we need to make our graduates future ready. So those graduates have to be ready to pivot and turn. We can't have them specifically trained in this one topic because, you know, you're going to need to be able to respond to whatever comes down the track. So you've got to have that inner skill set that you basically believe in yourself, that you can adapt, change, pivot, flex, etc. So we try to make our graduates future ready. And a big part of doing that is research. And a big part that we've also come to realise, and we've been very focused on this, is our postgraduate population and having them future ready, with future ready master's programmes and future ready PhD programmes, where with a PhD you're tackling a subject that has never been researched before. So you're learning that ability to think critically, think creatively, problem solve, etc. And where the rankings have really helped us is we're looking at our whole population and composition of our population as a whole. And actually, I've been banging the drum since 2017 that we need to increase our PGR numbers. The rankings actually give us a little bit of evidence behind that to support that, which has then been taken on board as well. So we're actually able to use the rankings to drive us in a direction that we want to go in anyway.
And sorry, Ben, if I may just add to that, because you used the word proxy, and I think that's important as well, because we do a lot of surveying of students as well. So we run the International Student Survey. It's the world's largest survey of international students pre-enrollment. And students are using rankings as a proxy for teaching quality. So teaching quality is the #1 most important thing to international students when they're looking at a university. But how do they know what the teaching quality is? They don't know, right? And so they're using rankings as a proxy for teaching quality. And that becomes even more evident when you drill down into the data if you look at China, where we know in China rankings rule all, right? And so that number increases to over 60% of students surveyed in China are looking at rankings as the most important factor, and they're using that as a proxy for teaching quality.
I mean, that speaks directly, in a way, to to the question that you're asking, because you're absolutely right, Selma, that students around the world are using rankings as a measure of teaching quality, but that's exactly one dimension of what universities do that the rankings don't do a very good job of measuring. You know, and you might be surprised to hear me say something like that. In fact, throughout the journey of rankings, we've adopted the position that's best summarized by the American statistician George Box, who once said, essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. And up until this point, it's been clear in our engagement with all stakeholders around the world that people find these metrics quite useful, but that we have a responsibility to persistently remind them of what they're not, actually. And that can be difficult sometimes because we can say it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people hear it. We spend a lot of time encouraging students to not base their decisions only on a ranking in the way that you characterized your decision-making back in the 80s. I'm sure you did look at other things as well. Say, try and meet people from the institution, try and attend events, try and interact with alumni if you get the opportunity. Look online, look on their website, look at a variety of different sources to determine that that's the right choice for you. But there are so many choices out there that having a shortlisting tool, somewhere you can start to break it down and narrow it down, still remains helpful. In the institutional context, and you summarized it really well there Helen, I think the university strategy can be informed by rankings, but it shouldn't be led by rankings. And it is true that in some parts of the world, institutions have gone a bit far with that. Now, there's another byproduct of this reset that we're doing, that institutions who've taken a holistic view on their strategy, who are already working on some of the things that the new measures are there to encourage, have come through the process with a reasonable degree of stability. Other institutions who've perhaps doubled down too purely on the things that are being measured are finding, as we've shifted the weights and measures, that perhaps that hadn't been the right thing to do. Now, we're working with institutions around the world to help them through that transition. And I hope that one byproduct of changing the methodology after all this time will be that people are a little bit slower to buy it hook, line, and sinker as a blueprint for what they should do as a university. That distinctiveness, that sense of personal identity, breaking down that homogenization. Ironically, that's a good set of tactics for improving in the rankings, because the reputation component really thrives off that distinctiveness. But it's also the right thing to do for your institution in the first place, to reconnect with its founding principles, if you will. We're coming officially past the end of the time allowed, but if there's one more question, I think we can take one more question there at the back.
Hello, I'm Arwa Tajouri from Institut Polytechnique de Paris. Well, first of all, congratulations on the new ranking. I have two technical questions. It's about the data behind the indicators. We got our fact file. I mean, you did a major effort to put a lot of info, a lot of data in the fact file regarding papers, citations, etc. But there are some criteria for which we don't have any, I don't want to say any data, but any exact info. Is there a way for us institutions to get more data, more info, just to understand how you compute indicators and criteria? And my second question is about the reputation indicators. I mean, 5 years, it's a long time. Do you think about narrow it down to, I don't know, like 3 or 4 or 3 years, because 5 years is a long time. There are a lot of flows, incoming, outgoing, academics going in, academics, going out. I think that 5 years is a long time. Do you think of changing the time slot for future rankings?
Good questions both, and I'm probably best placed to answer them concisely in this context. On the second question, the most important thing from a technical standpoint is the strength and depth of the data set that we run the metrics off in order to provide a degree of predictability and stability over time. So I don't think we'll shorten from 5 years, but it is worth noting that the oldest years carry less weight in that measure. So we focus full weight on the most recent 3 years, and then the fourth year in history is 50%, and the fifth year in history is 25%. So that smooths it off and focuses on things that are a bit more contemporary. In terms of unpacking the detail, based on us looking at what happens with other organizations providing rankings, we tried to provide a fact file that presents a clearer and more detailed picture of the underlying data than is being provided by anybody else in that context. But there's an interesting tension between unpacking too much of the information and potentially enabling institutions who might not be as ethical as others to use that information to attempt to manipulate the outcomes, shall we say, and then providing enough transparency to help institutions understand what's being measured and why the outcomes are what they are. So we work extensively with individual institutions around the world, responding to individual inquiries through our rankings help desk, and we've got extensive documentation in that area. And obviously in the new indicators that we've got, we're a little bit earlier stage at having the machinery to unpack the detail on that. So bear with us as we evolve those dimensions. We'll be able to unpack a little bit more insight. And if you've got specific questions for your institution, then please engage with our team, and we'll do the best that we can to help clarify your questions. So thank you very much to our panel. I'll let you escape the stage. Hopefully there are stairs at both ends. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we touched upon, particularly in that last question, is data is kind of all important. One of the other dimensions that's facilitated this reset in methodology is the data environment that we're in now versus that we were in when we started the rankings almost 20 years ago is unrecognizable. I remember in the first year we put out this question that simply said number of faculty. And some universities gave us their full-time equivalent number, some their full-time head count, some their total head count, some just said 6, the Faculty of Engineering, the Faculty of Science. So, our ability to ask the right questions has evolved dramatically, the availability of data has evolved dramatically, and our persistent quest for stronger and deeper data sets continues and will continue for some time yet to come. However, one of the cornerstones of our ranking and a number of others is good bibliometric information on what's happening in research, how institutions are collaborating through their research. And Elsevier has been our trusted partner since 2007, underpinning many of our rankings metrics in the research space. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome our Elsevier speaker to the stage for the remainder of this session's time. Dr. Başak Kandemir is Director, Analytical and Data Services, and a variety of other roles, including 6 years at the University of Sussex. And so she has experience of the position that you're in and what it means to be inside a university, seeing these metrics come from outside. So, Başak, welcome to the stage, and thank you very much for being with us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining the session, and thanks, Ben, for the introduction. As mentioned, I am working at the Analytical and Data Services division of Elsevier, where we work a lot with research assessment and research performance. And today, we mark the 20 years of QS rankings. In this presentation, I want to talk to you about how data needs have evolved and how that goes in parallel in the rankings as well. I would like to give you a snapshot of how performance can change and move down from a national, institutional, down to the individual level as well. And finally, focus on the importance of mobility and collaboration for rankings. Well, the theme of the summit is students at the heart of education. We maybe all assume that we, as institutions, want to attract more students, and we've been talking about the factors that contribute to this, but this is not commonly accepted everywhere. I live in the Netherlands since 6 years, and what we are seeing in the Netherlands more recently is the Minister for Education, Culture and Science, Robert de Graaf, said the influx of international students must be curbed. The number of international students in the Netherlands have increased by 3.5 times compared to 2005-06, and that there are challenges in the workloads of the staff, or even around things like accommodation, where we also listened to yesterday. So this is not a, whether I agree or disagree is not the question, but just to say that there are different points of view going around. And what they are talking about is now saying that we need to differentiate, and we need to decide which institutions focus on what areas, which is also in parallel with what Salma was mentioning in terms of, universities must differentiate. Maastricht University is one of the examples, sitting in the corner of 3 countries, attracting a lot of international students. Meanwhile, in China, President Xi mentioned that a new path must be developed for China with local indicators, and that they cannot follow foreign standards. So we are seeing this evolution of research ecosystems and research evaluation going around the world. And this is also what Ben mentioned in terms of evaluation systems, but also rankings are changing, and sometimes they are possibly causing change themselves. At Elsevier, we recognize that these evaluation systems, whether that's a national assessment or whether that's a ranking, is changing, and we are working on developing our understanding and how we can connect to that. You may traditionally know us as a publisher. We are that. But we are, for over a decade, have been working with research intelligence data, and we are looking to expand this. So our current understanding, and this is, by the way, not a definite view, this is our view at this point, is we are trying to define the academic evaluation system in 5 pillars: around input, around education, around research and innovation, and outcomes and impact. We are better in some parts than rest. The first 2 pillars remain a big challenge for us. But we have traditionally worked quite a lot on bibliometric data around volume of publications, of traditional outputs, citation indicators. Looked into things like knowledge exchange between university and industry. But we are now expanding into indicators around the societal impact of science, the economic impact of science. And just as in rankings, we acknowledge that these are proxy indicators. They cannot measure the capture, but they are proxies to our understanding. We are trying to understand non-traditional outputs. So how can we measure videos or performances in arts? And we are also trying to understand the research culture. Is there gender equality? Are we nurturing early career researchers? Is the research interdisciplinary enough or multidisciplinary enough? So this is what we've been working based also on our work with national governments, supranational governments, and large funders as well. However, furthermore, what we are realizing is we've been working on this based on our Scopus data, but we are realizing sometimes we need to go beyond data that is globally standardized and benchmarkable, and we need to dig deep to find local data and work on that local data. And this is what we've been working on in the last year, which is what we define as our national research evaluation platforms. We realize that incomplete, fragmented, unconnected data is a hindrance to process. Sometimes lack of local language content is a challenge, and non-traditional research outputs in disciplines such as arts and humanities, and sometimes the disconnect between research and innovation data are challenges for the research community. So what we are trying to do in these national research evaluation platforms is basically create knowledge networks which deliver an integrated view of relevant research data which drive high-value decisions. The way we do that is we are collecting data. Sometimes, and if the local language content is in different languages, we translate that data, and we create bibliometric records enrich that, validate that, and combine it to create a large knowledge network. So this was just to set the context on where we are seeing the larger view of the research evaluation ecosystems or research ecosystems. If we move down then to the institutions and the role of rankings, there are other parts that I want to mention. And here maybe it's a good time to say, just as QS is celebrating the 20 years of its launch, Scopus is in its 19th year. And as Ben mentioned, we've been partnering with QS since 2007. And what has happened in these 20 years is also we have evolved our content in Scopus. We have added book content back in 2013 because we understand that that is relevant for arts and humanities. We have added preprints because we understand that that is a part of the research ecosystem. And we have added now to researcher profiles things around policy citations, around altmetrics, so that we can capture societal impact better as well. Also to mention, as of 5th of July, 2024 QS rankings data will also be available in SciVal, where you'll be able to analyze bibliometric drivers behind citations per faculty data, as well as behind the International Research Network data. In this slide, I just want to show you a data-driven view of our understanding of data and the different indicators. What you're seeing here is a scatter plot of top 600 institutions that were in the QS World University Rankings from 2021 to 2023. And what we are seeing is there's a correlation between an institution's overall rank and the rank of its individual indicators, more or less. When we focus on the citations per faculty, we see that there's a general correlation. If you're doing better in citations per faculty, you are doing better in overall ranking as well. However, there are also volatilities in certain ranges. Here, what we are marking is the 200-400 range. And what you're seeing is that something like the citations per faculty is less of a differentiator in there. You see this line is, the competition there is really tough. And this is where other indicators that go beyond some of the bibliometric data come into play, around things like reputation, teaching, internationalization, become really important in differentiating your institution beyond the citation per faculty. And this is one way to understand maybe how research performance evolves. We also see what we mentioned, this is, by the way, if you keep in mind the 200-400, what we are seeing is the emergence of new players. This is data that we had from SciVal. And just one point that I noted before coming up for this presentation is this year's rankings featured 85 new entrants, and it said that half of these new entrants are from Asia. This is not surprising. What you're seeing here is the scholarly publication trend. And the publication trend has slowed down in the last 6-year period compared to the 2007-12. However, Africa and Asia were the two regions that have actually increased their publication performance at a faster rate than the world average. And considering the lagging effect of rankings, it is not surprising that we see more institutions coming up in the rankings from these regions as well. I want to move on to touch upon the importance of individuals in driving the performance and rankings data. And here, my colleagues, the credit goes to them. They are the data scientists to drive this very fancy and sometimes difficult to read plot. But they've taken the example of École Normale Supérieure de Lyon to show how individual researchers may affect the performance of an institution. What we are seeing here is the impact of new entrants to ENSL. And those, so we looked at the 2023 World University Rankings data, took the bibliometric data for 2017, 2021, and what we see is prior to 2017, those new joiners to ENSL actually improved their citation performance once they joined. And this also led to ENSL, well, not only this, we cannot say it's a causation, we see a correlation, that the citation per faculty rank of ENSL has increased as well. However, what we are seeing since 2017 is there has been a reversing effect that we see that citation per paper has been decreasing. And it wouldn't be surprising, actually, that if we see some of these changes reflecting in the citation per faculty rank as well. This is to touch upon the importance of researchers and the researcher mobility. We have been talking about researcher mobility and its relevance to collaboration. Why is mobility important? Research is a network discipline. It doesn't happen in isolation. And when you do good research, if no one reads it, it doesn't really, it doesn't matter. Not that it doesn't matter, but no one knows about it. Networking is fostered by collaboration. Researchers find each other, they collaborate to solve problems, and in the panel, apologies, Helen mentioned the importance of personal, so academic to academic connections to drive collaborations, and mobility is one of those mechanisms for collaboration as well. And what we are seeing is those publications that have been international collaborated lead to higher scholarly impact as well. And there are different effects of international collaboration beyond the direct ranking. It also helps you with your reputation as well. So there are quite a lot of benefits to mobility and collaboration. What we also see is if we look into the institutional mobility, we do this by tracking the authors and their affiliation profiles over time. What we are seeing is that it has been relatively stable, but in the most recent years, we've seen a small increase in the mobility of institutional mobility, so researchers moving around different institutions. We don't know whether this is a trend or an observation yet. We don't quite know what drives it and what effects maybe of COVID has on this. But what we see is international mobility also increasing a little bit as well, not at the same level. How does this maybe reflect to the rankings? This is a ranking, this is a graph where you see four groups of institutions clustered together, authors that are in institutions in these four groups. And this shows the percentage of authors with international origin. And what we are observing is the top-ranked institutions, so the dark blue bar, grew during the first decade much more than lower-ranked institutions. However, they seem to have stagnated in the more recent years. And we see early signals of decrease for top institutions. This is a different view versus the number of authors that moved between institutions and countries in the previous charts. What does this also mean is the share of authors also affects sometimes the performance in terms of publication. So the average count of authorship of authors with international origin, what you see here is the lowest ranked institutions actually gain more in terms of citation per, in terms of authorship with international origin. They gain more from international authors compared to some of the top institutions. This all links to the notion that international linkages are important, especially in the context of rankings and beyond. And we have seen with the latest QS rankings that international research network has been added as a new metric, and this is how it ties to it as well. We also saw, however, that employment outcomes, sustainability are among the other indicators that have been added. So I guess my final proposition is Rankings are evolving, evaluation systems are evolving, and data is evolving. Is your institution evolving with data and how it interacts with data? So we are curious to understand your thoughts on this question, and we would be very happy if you want to come by our stand and discuss. Thank you very much. By the way, I know we didn't actually foresee time for questions, and we thought we could do it at the stand, but if there are 1 or 2 questions, I don't know.
Hi, me again, sorry. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was quite insightful. I have a very simple question. It's about the, you were talking about the international origin of authors. If I'm not mistaken, when you go to an author's profile on Scopus, you have like various affiliations. How do you qualify, I mean, my question is very simple. Which affiliation do you take into account to consider the author in question as international?
Yes, good question, thank you. We do that based on the affiliation profile history. So basically, if we take an analysis at one point, let's say you are a researcher at Trinity College now, but previously you have worked in University of Twente in the Netherlands. That does count as an author with an international origin. So it's not possible that we know about nationalities or citizenships. It's based on your affiliation history in Scopus. I think there's one question here.
Yeah, I'm intrigued about the obviously, I suppose intuitively, we know that if you've got co-author papers with international authors, you're getting higher citations. I mean, how do you adjust for the size effect? That, you know, if I'm in India, I'm in a country of 1.4 billion people, and you know, if I'm in Luxembourg, I'm in a country of 500,000 people, and almost everything I do is going to be international. But you know, that's really a scale effect, isn't it? Because there's only one university in Luxembourg, and there's 11,000 universities in India. So that's my first question. Then the second one is, and I'm sure you haven't done this, but my question would be, intuitively, you also think it might matter if you would have more impact if you were maybe a cross-language. You know, if I'm in Austria and I co-author with somebody in Germany, that may have much less impact in my citations because I'm not reaching really a new market by co-authoring. Whereas if I'm in the UK and I co-author with the United States, I'm hitting 2 different groups of researchers. So just a couple of questions about how we'd start to make sense of those kind of effects.
2 very good and intriguing questions, and I'm going to copy from Ben in being a sponge for new ideas and understanding new things. But let me start with the second one, and this is not based on data, but my understanding. I think it's a good question, and that is one effect, the market, let's say, and your network is one effect. The other effect of collaboration, though, because we see that collaboration, whether that is institutional, national, or international, leads to higher scholarly impact in general, and it increases in that direction. And I think it's because you also have a diversity in the number of people and their minds coming together. It's like multidisciplinarity, that you work with different schools of thought that are coming together. So next to the market effect, you also have, you reach maybe higher scholarly impact because you are bringing more than one way of thinking into the table. The second question is a really good question. I don't think we have looked into it in particular. And it is true, I guess if you are Luxembourg, you have to collaborate more internationally than India. So it's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I'm intrigued to look into it. Thank you. Any further questions? If not, I guess we can give some of that time back. And as mentioned, we'll be very happy to discuss individual cases or further in our stand as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to both the panelists beforehand in that presentation. Elsevier does have a booth if you have any questions.